Go ahead and get started. Deborah, I'll just let you go ahead and take right over. Well, Deborah actually is our presenter tonight. She's the Director of Parent and Community Engagement. She is the parent of 3 children, and 2 of them have dyslexia. She is a member of the New Jersey State Special Education Advisory Council, and she's a wonderful MSL trained tutor. So believe it or not, she even finds time to tutor kids between all her busy stuff. And she is a founding member of Decoding Dyslexia. So tonight she's going to share a lot of knowledge about IEPs and how to, understand all the lingo so that you can get the appropriate services for your kids. So Deborah, we'd like to go ahead and just have you jump right in and get started.
Great. Well, thanks, Jennifer. I'm really excited to be here tonight. I just want to take a minute to thank our host this evening. I live down in southern New Jersey, and the Center for Neurological and Neurodevelopmental Health is not too far from me. They're a few towns over. I've actually visited them and had some work with one of my children done there, some evaluation and study work done. So I want to thank them for participating in this workshop series. We've done a few things with them already, and we have another workshop coming up later on next month. So thank you to CNNH, and I want to encourage anyone that's in New Jersey, particularly in southern New Jersey or the King of Prussia area of Pennsylvania, to check them out if they need any kind of evaluation services for your children. You can find their website listed here, cnnh.org, and they also let me know that they have a great newsletter that they keep everyone up to date on different activities and things that are going on through their center, so you can email them at the email address listed there and get in touch with them directly. So tonight's presentation is going to be all about the IEP process, but what I will share is that it's a little bit of an awkward time to be having this presentation. We did this as part of our webinar series earlier in the beginning of spring, end of winter, beginning of spring, because it was really the time that all of the evaluation or the IEP review cycle was sort of starting. So it's a little bit late in the year right now. But what I'm hoping that we can do is share enough information with you that you can be taking notes and getting yourself prepared for next year's IEP season, or perhaps you'll be able to take a look at your IEP here tonight, and if you see anything that you think needs to be polished up a bit, or questions that you have for your team, you can take that stuff back now and have those discussions. So timing isn't always great for these kinds of things, but I really feel that just getting the knowledge and understanding the process on solid ground is very beneficial at any time of year. So it's important to understand that the IEP, yes, it's a document, right? It is a legal document. It's the contract between the parent and the school district that's going to give us a level of understanding about what's going to be required at an individual level for this student. But more importantly, I urge parents to understand that it's a process. So yes, it's a document, but more importantly, it's a process that you're working through with the other members of your IEP team. And it's that process that really leads us to the end game of a document that has the information in it that we know that our children need. So first and foremost, just to give you an overview of what this IEP process is all about. Anytime you get to a slide which has the little purple circle in the bottom right-hand corner, that's going to let you know that it corresponds to a handout that is listed in the material section, and you can download that handout for later reference. So this one will have the IEP cycle in the handout section for download. But basically, it's a series of steps that families work through with their team in order to produce this IEP. And it starts with step 1, which is the identification or referral step. And this is where either a parent or a district staff member or a teacher or principal makes a referral to the school district special education department stating that they believe this child may be an individual with a disability and that evaluations are going to be warranted. Step 2 moves into the process of, after you've made that referral and you've had a meeting to discuss what the child's areas of concerns are you going to do an evaluation to see what the child's strengths and weaknesses actually are? At this step, it does require that a parent have signed consent for them to complete those evaluations. After the evaluations are completed, it moves into step 3, which is the determination of eligibility. So after you get those evaluation reports and the team has come back together to explain those to you and to discuss what the findings show, the school district is going to tell you whether or not the child qualifies for special education services within the district. After the eligibility is confirmed, it moves into the IEP development process. Now, a lot of times this happens right at the same meeting, and you don't really even get a sense that these are 2 different steps in the process. You know, you kind of they tell you, yes, the child qualifies for special ed, and then they kind of drop a draft IEP in front of you and things get rolling. But it is important to know that these are 2 distinct steps in the process, determining eligibility and then beginning to develop that IEP contract or document. So after step 4, which is really where we're going to be spending a lot of our time tonight, really talking about the development of that IEP, then it moves into step 5, which is how the IEP is implemented. Step 6 starts talking about monitoring of the IEP. We will talk about a little bit about that tonight and talking about progress monitoring. And then as you move into step 7, this is where the whole process starts to loop back around again, because every year the school district is required to do an annual review of the prior year's IEP and to start development for the next year's IEP. And then every 3 years, the district is required to actually do those evaluations again, and again pump you back into step 3, where they will determine if the child continues to meet the eligibility qualifications for special education, and then you go back into the cycle again. So just a quick overview for you to understand how the whole process works, and we're going to spend most of our time tonight on steps 4, 5, and 6. So step 4 is where the IEP is actually developed. And as a general rule that I want you all to write down on your notepads, your pieces of paper, make stickers to put on your binders that you take in, is a fundamental understanding of how an IEP is developed. It is the child's needs that drive the development of IEP goals, and then it are the goals that actually help you make decisions about what services are needed, okay? So we need to make sure that we are clearly outlining and identifying our child's needs. We need to be using those needs to develop the goals. And then it's those goals that we're going to look at, and the team is going to have to make decisions about what those services are going to look like in order for that child to meet the goals that we've just outlined. And we'll go more in depth about all of these as we move forward. But really, really important to understand, this is the crux of developing a good IEP. Needs drive goals, and goals drive services. So we know that parents and students are equal members on these IEP teams, but it's really important to understand what role do we play in the IEP process. And I actually like to talk about this from the focus of child-centric, right? A complete process that is focused on this individual child. And as a parent, you know, I believe Jennifer told you I have 3 boys and 2 of them are dyslexic. My middle son is not dyslexic but has other special needs. So I have had an IEP for every one of them, and I go back 11 years, maybe 12 if I count the preschool disabled program, 12 years of dealing with this IEP process. And I've come to understand in those years that I am there for a very, very specific purpose, and I want other parents to understand that you have to have the confidence to really step into this role, because we are there to help our teams remain child-focused. Because if your experiences have been anything like mine over the years, it can be anything but. It really has a lot to do with different priorities on different people's plates and different perspectives on how things are going to operate within a school district. But truly the process is there to be child focused, and if there's going to be any team member who's there to speak up in advocacy of that, it's the parent, it's us. So we need to make sure that that team understands that we are here at this table to discuss my child's life. And that may sound dramatic, but quite honestly, it really is. This is a matter of, my child being able to graduate on time, being able to get a job, being a contributing member of society. And IEPs are there to make sure that the services and supports are in place for our children so that they get through this educational experience intact. So we need to make sure the correct academic programming is in place, the correct accommodations and supports, and that emotionally our child is thriving and is actually building the skill set that it takes to advocate for themselves and become independent. So we are there to make sure that the team understands all of that, and we need to make sure that they know where the child is in any given point in time, and come to the realization that we're here to work together to get him where he wants to be and also where he needs to be. So really, really important role, and there's going to be a lot of things that we have to learn and a skill set that we have to build in order to do this really well. So one of the first things I like to talk to other parents about is this idea of positions versus interests. And I spent a lot of time doing it all wrong. And I can look back now and, I've learned over the years how to do things in a little bit of a different way. But I will tell you, it's really, really hard because it feels like you're living between two worlds. There's this, world of, reading books and, coming to Learning Ally and talking to other parents and getting information and going to webinars and workshops. And it's like very clear, right? The science is there. We know how to work with kids with dyslexia. We know what types of interventions they need. We know the types of accommodations that are beneficial. But unfortunately, we have to live in this very different world, and it's the world of our public schools. And they tend to not be sharing the same knowledge base, and it makes it really, really challenging. And we can fall into the role of just asking for a lot of stuff to the point where sometimes it even feels like we might be demanding it, and it's out of pure frustration because we expect that those that we're looking to be the educational experts would be the ones offering these things. And when it doesn't happen, that can be extremely frustrating and at times quite painful. But what I've learned over the years is that shifting the focus a little bit away from your position, which is the what, it's that specific solution that you're proposing to resolve a problem. And the example I might use is my son needs the Wilson language program. You need to put the Wilson reading system in place for my son. That's a what. And what it does is it sets you up into a position where the school district can either say yes or no. And as soon as you get to that point, there's no chance to have further discussions or the level of depth of understanding about, what's going on with the child. It's just a simple yes or no. If they don't have the program, the answer is no. If they do have it, they may say yes, and then there's no further discussion about what the expectations are for using that program and things like that. So what I recommend is that you start thinking about it in terms of negotiating. So you're not negotiating around a what, you're negotiating around the why. And the why is your interest. It's what you're looking to accomplish out of your request. So that's the underlying need that's existing, and it's kind of why you're asking for the what. But you need to talk to them about the why first. So this would be, my son has significant deficits in the area of phonological processing and decoding skills, and his spelling is just in the toilet. I need to see that we're putting a reading program in place that's going to address those skill sets. What reading programs do you have available that are structured enough to teach him the syllable types, the spelling rules and spelling patterns and phonics patterns. That would be the discussion that you're having at the IEP level, to focus on what the child's needs are and asking for them to start suggesting solutions as to what is going to be an appropriate an appropriate response or an appropriate program to put in place. So what we need to start out doing as we're going into one of these IEP meetings is really ask ourselves this question: why is the solution so important to my child, right? So why does my child need the Wilson reading program? And you have to dissect that, and you have to take notes for yourself and get yourself prepared to go in and focus on why they need that. And then ultimately, your job is to get the team to focus on that too. So this is all about focusing on the why. It's moving from a position-based negotiating practice to an interest-based negotiating practice. So really, when I learned this a few years ago, it was kind of enlightening to me, and I was like, wow, it's a very different conversation when you can get dialogues going around things instead of just a yes or a no. So if any of you have your IEPs with you tonight, it would be a good time for you to pull them out and have them at the ready and take some notes about what we're going to start talking about. So remember I said needs drive goals and goals drive services. So for the next few slides here, we're going to focus on the child's needs. And the needs are outlined in the section of the IEP that's called the present levels of performance, or sometimes it's called the present levels of academic and functional performance. Okay, so this is the section of the IEP that is really giving you the starting point from which the next year's progress is going to be measured. So this part of the IEP, it's usually written like a narrative, and there's some data points in there about where the child is. It really, you need to be able to read that and say to yourself, yes, that is a snapshot of my child at this point in time. And if it is not detailed enough, we need to go back and do some work here. So the things that you want to see in this present levels section, you definitely want to see the results of all of the evaluations that have been completed on your child. If this is the first IEP, they should be in there very, very thoroughly, a good overview of all of those evaluation results that actually resulted in your child qualifying for services. If you're a couple years out from that, maybe it's your second year or third year IEP from that evaluation cycle, you might not see all of that stuff listed. You might start to see more information in there that's really about progress monitoring data, right? So you might see a reference to the older evaluation results, and then you'll see the updated progress monitoring information. You should also be seeing things in there that are observations from the classroom. So the teacher should be telling you what it looks like in the classroom. So you might see some data in there, and then you might also see some narratives that talk about how your child is responding to the interventions, what kinds of strategies the teacher sees them using. The other thing could be grades. Really important, if they're listing grades in there, it must be noted if those grades are due to are being reported and accommodations have been used or modifications have been in place. Because saying that a child is, on grade level in writing, and their report card shows that they have a B in writing, if you don't note that that is a grade that is given after the child's independent writing has gone through the whole editing process and has been reviewed by peers and then assisted with the teacher, and the spelling has been edited, and the child put it through a spelling program on the computer. If that stuff is not noted, then it looks like your child is independently achieving a grade of B on a grade level writing assignment. And if that is not accurate, you need to make sure that all of that information is included, because if the child's not doing that independently, we need to know that so that it doesn't look like they are. And then some other information that might be in that PLOP or the PLAF section would be behavioral data, if that pertains to your child, or homework data. And sometimes I tell parents this can sometimes be the the place where our kids are really falling apart because they've put in a whole day of, intense work during the school hours, and then they come home and just the thought of putting in more time into homework, maybe some of them are emotionally falling apart, or maybe just the time it takes to get through it is more than would be expected. So as parents, we should be documenting that for the school, and if it relates to their present level of performance, if we know that they are not independently doing homework at the pace and rate that their peers are, we would want to put that information in. And one little trick that I do sometimes is, if the homework assignments come home, I'll let my sons try it first independently for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and then if I have to step in and help, I will mark that. I will write it right on the homework assignment, like, Hudson worked on this assignment for 15 minutes independently, and then I'll put a little mark, like he got up to question 3, and then I will say, I assisted for the rest of the page, and I will put, we started at 6 o'clock and we ended at, 7:15. Or if I needed to read the directions or the questions to him, I will write in there, I needed to read this worksheet to my son, or my son needed to use his dictation tool to write these responses. So I am giving that data into the teacher, and then when it comes time to see this in the present levels, if that is something that they're not independent around homework, that's also something I'd want to see in the present levels section. So the present level section is usually this narrative that's written by one of the team members. So it's important for a parent to know who on the team is going to be preparing that draft of the student's present levels of performance. And then you need to talk to that person, initiate a discussion with them, and find out a little bit of information up front, or this is the person that you want to share with them, like, hey, homework's been really hard. When you write his present levels section, could you make sure that you put information about them not being very independent in this area, or they've had a hard time studying this year? Could you make sure you note that when you're writing your draft? And the other thing you can do is you can ask this person if they would share an advanced copy of it with you, and then that way, if you have additional information that you'd like to see included, you can give it to them ahead of time, and when you get to the IEP team meeting and you get your draft IEP, you might see that the things that you talked about were already included. So it's just a good practice to get into. So things that you want to talk about with this person who's writing the draft, and sometimes it's the special ed teacher. Other times it could be what do you call that on the IEP team? The case manager. It depends. It's different in every state. So you want to find out who it is that does it, and these are the kinds of things you want to talk to them about. You want to give them input from your perspective as well as your child's perspective, because that's really important. Information to share. The teacher has their perspective, but there are other people in the mix that need to be contributing. So if your child, if the teacher reports that guided reading time group work is going really smoothly, but your child says, no, I hate it, like I can't follow along, I don't know what's happening when I'm in my reading group, you need to share that information with the teacher so that they're understanding that while she's not seeing any problems during that time, the child's actually reporting that that's not going so well for them. You also want to ask this person any questions you might have on the specific data points that you're going to need to see included. So, for example, if you're looking at your present levels right now and you're like, oh my gosh, there's no data in here, this would be something that you want to clarify with them, and you need to say, we know that decoding has been a weak area here and it's affecting his ability to read fluently, which is ultimately then not allowing him to comprehend what he's reading. So since we know this is an area of need, I'm going to expect to see some information in there about his independent decoding skills and maybe some fluency scores. I want to see how he's progressing in the area of fluency. So if you give them that information up front about what you're expecting to see and the type of progress you want to see them reporting out on, there's a better chance that you'll show up at the meeting and you'll see that information in there. And then you can also use it as an opportunity to start talking with that person about the types of goals that you might want to start discussing at the meeting. Again, decoding has been a problem. It might be a good idea to see some goals in there that talk about, how my son understands letter sound correspondence, or how he's going to make progress understanding the syllable types, or things like that. So it's an opportunity to really connect with that person and set the stage for what the discussion is going to look like at the IEP review and development meeting. Okay, and there's a little handout notice on this slide, so you can look in the materials section, and there are some different handouts in there that will be helpful for you in prompting these kinds of discussions about different points that you might be looking at when you're developing, looking at this data. So I'm going to give you a sample now. So this is how the webinar is going to work. We're going to give a sample of a poor present level section, and then we'll talk about what it looks like if it was written appropriately. So let's imagine that you get your child's IEP, and that present level section says something like this. John struggles to read grade level material. He loses his place and becomes distracted during reading group time. His behavior impedes his learning, and he stumbles when attempting to read multisyllabic words. So is this enough, right? Remember, the present levels is the starting point. It's what needs to be in place so that at the end of that IEP cycle, we can look back, and seeing where the child is now, we can tell how much growth has been made. So is there enough information in this present levels description to tell us if John makes progress at the end of the year? Probably not, right? It doesn't even tell us where he is right now. It tells us he struggles to read grade level material, but it doesn't actually tell us what level he is able to read independently. Okay? It gives us some information about his behavior, but doesn't really tell us what the behaviors are and what would need to be looking different at the end of the year. So this is not what I would consider a good PLAFT, and unfortunately I see many that are written at this very vague level. Johnny is a pleasure to have in class. He always welcomes me with a smile, and gee, thank you. I'm glad to learn that stuff about my son, but I really need to see the data, and it needs to be objective because I need to know where his starting point is. So here's an example of a better starting point, a better present levels. On a first read of 4th grade level text, John orally reads 40 to 50 correct words per minute with 80% accuracy as measured by the Dibbles. While John has mastered the sound letter correspondences in isolation, he still confuses short vowel sounds when reading connected text. He struggles to decode words containing vowel team, R-controlled, and final consonant LE syllable types. His reading struggles are starting to impact his behavior during reading group work. He is distracted and needs to be redirected 2 to 3 times per group session. And parents report that homework involving reading tasks is causing avoidance behaviors at home. So this gives you a clear picture of John. Right? We actually have the data that's looking at his ability to read fluently based on a standardized progress monitoring tool. And we also have a lot of good description in here from the educator that's telling us what skill sets he has and which ones he's still having trouble with. And then there's some information in there about behavior, and then a reporting out from the parent. So this is a sample of what we want a good present levels to look like. So if you have your IEP and it doesn't look like this, of course this is a made-up sample, so I can't say like this is actually what's going to need to be in your child's present levels section, but this can give you a starting point to start thinking about these are the things you need to ask about. Well, has my son mastered sound letter correspondences? Can he do it in isolation? Can he do it in connected text? Does he know all the syllable types? How's his behavior? Are there any avoidance things happening? It'll give you a starting point to start thinking through what are some of the questions you need to go back and ask. So take a look at your child's present levels of performance and then ask yourself, is it written in a way that makes this a good starting point from which I can then write goals? And I don't mean you write goals independently, but I mean your team. Does your team have enough information in that present levels to actually know where we have to start with writing goals? okay? And if there's not, then you need to go back and ask for more data to be added. Okay, so let me go back and talk about this. So is it a good starting point from which to write goals? So looking at John's, I would say, yeah, you know what? I think I can look at this and I'm going to need a goal in there around reading fluency and definitely around reading accuracy. 80% accuracy is not what we want to be seeing. And it looks like we're going to have to write some goals in there about short vowel, right? He's making confusions with short vowel sounds when he's reading connected text, and also looks like some of the syllable types he hasn't mastered yet. So it starts giving you some ideas about the types of things he's going to need to work on next year. So remember, you now have your needs. They're all outlined appropriately in your present level section, and the team now starts to discuss those areas of need because you have to start looking at developing your annual measurable goals. So goals are intended to move a child towards grade level standards, and very, very important to remember this. In this day and age, with many states having adopted the Common Core state standards, and some of the other states have their own curriculum standards and things of that nature, it is important for all children to be held to grade level standards. But if they don't have the skill sets in certain areas, we might have to be writing goals that are based on standards from lower grades. And a lot of times that gets confusing, and school districts think like, well, no, I have to abide by the Common Core, so that means I have to write goals that are on grade level standards, and that just wouldn't make sense, right? I mean, that the child wouldn't, if the child could keep up on grade level standards, then we wouldn't need an individual education plan. So goals need to be written with the expectation that we're trying to get the kids up towards grade level standards. So you might see goals in there that are focused on skill sets that are things that you would typically see in the standards of lower grades. And one thing that happens a lot, and it's just wrong, is I see a lot of times that the IEP goals are actually just the standards cut and paste. So you'll see like whatever the little code is, like section AB 1.5, whatever, and then it lists the standard. It's nice to have the standard listed because you want to understand, what area of the standards you're looking at. But the goal would not be just that standard restated. And I explain it this way to parents. All children are required to meet the state standards. So using that as a goal in an IEP makes no sense because they're already required to meet it. So just using those as IEP goals is not individualized. What it is you look at the standard that the child is struggling with, or the standard that you know they're going to have a problem meeting, and you backtrack and you write a goal that is actually going to help build the underlying skills that will eventually make the child be more successful in meeting that standard. So that's how it works. If you find that they're copied and pasted, and I have seen this in my own children's IEPs, I just explain it to them that way, that I'm surprised to see these cut and pasted in. It is my understanding that while we want the goals to be based on standards, my child's already required to meet this just because he's in 4th grade. So could we individualize a goal that will help him be more successful in meeting his individual needs? That's the wording that I would use with them. It's also vital to understand that the goals need to be objectively measurable. So you should see that goal, and when you read it, it should be absolutely clear to you what will happen at the end of the year to prove to you that they've met that goal. So if it says, and I'll give you samples of these moving forward, but if it says the child is going to, improve his fluency skills, and that's all it says, you'd be like, well, what will that look like at the end of a school year? What will he be able to do that proves to me? But if it says something very specific, like the child will be reading 120 correct words per minute, after a 1-minute probe on this measure, then at the end of a school year, they're going to be able to show you the passage that he read and the time that he read it in and how many words correct he read. So it needs to be based on objective data, and I always say that that's one of the most important things you can do is keep all of these discussions based on objective data, because it takes the personal it takes the interpersonal stress out of it. Like if you're relying on a teacher to tell you something was met, or her observations or her impressions, then it just puts you in a position of you're disputing her opinion on something. So everyone should be focused on objective data, and then it's the data that's telling you whether things are working or not. It's not one person's opinion over the other. And it's a really also a good practice to coordinate the units of measurement that you're using in goals with the type of progress monitoring tools that the district uses on a regular basis. So if they are using a Dibbles probe or an Ames Web probe, it can be helpful to use those measures in your goals. So it would say as measured by Dibbles, 4th grade probes, or as measured by Ames Web testing so many times per year. So it is good to talk a little bit about that with the team. What kind of progress monitoring tools do they currently use? And can we use the benchmarks of those tools as measurements in our goals? So here we go. Here are our samples again. And what we're asking ourselves when we look at these sample goals are they objectively measurable? Okay? So here's our first one. John will know and apply grade level phonics and word analysis skills in decoding words. This is one of those like almost copied and pasted from the standards, right? And then the second one is John will read with sufficient accuracy and fluency to support comprehension, right? So actually these are good skills that are mentioned in these goals, but I would question whether these are objectively measurable. At the end of a school year, how will I know that John can apply grade level phonics and word analysis skills? Like what is he going to have to show me that he's accomplished that? Or if we're saying that he's reading with sufficient accuracy and fluency to support comprehension, what does that look like? Like show me what that means. So if you're thinking that show me, look at these goals now. John will apply combined knowledge of all letter sound correspondence and syllabication patterns to automatically read unfamiliar multisyllabic words in context and pseudo words in isolation, that means wordless, with 96% accuracy. So at the end of an IEP season, I should be able to ask the team to see the list of words, the list of pseudo words that my son read, and did that list contain all of the letter sound correspondence and all of the syllabification patterns, and was he able to read those words automatically with 96% accuracy? So if there was a list of 100 words, could he read 96 of them? So that's what I mean when I say, can you see it? Is there something that you're actually going to be able to measure and see that measurement play out? Now here's the fluency goal. Given unfamiliar 5th grade level text, John will read with a fluency rate of 90 to 110 correct words per minute with 96% accuracy to support comprehension. Okay? This could have even gone a little bit further, and it could have said where the grade level text was coming from. So it might have said on Dibbles probes or Ames Web passages or something like that. But basically, at the end of the year, again, you're going to be able to say that, okay, here's a 5th grade level passage that he had never seen before. He read it independently, and he read at a rate, somewhere he read 97, right? 97 correct words per minute. Great. He met the fluency rate part of that goal. Then you can go in and see, did he read all of the words correctly? And if he read at least 96% of them correctly, then that means he met the accuracy goal, right? And then the support comprehension, that one was thrown in. I actually would probably say if comprehension was really a problem for the child, there should have been another goal written in around comprehension, and it would have a measure of, was able to answer so many implicit comprehension questions or explicit comprehension questions. But this goal was really a fluency goal, so we were focusing on rate and accuracy there. So I hope that you're getting a good sampling of what we mean by measurable goals. And I always hesitate in showing sample goals because the intention is never to have a parent sit down and try to copy these really fast word for word because, oh, this is the goal that you use for dyslexia, because it's going to look different for every student, because you have to remember, it's the child's needs that are driving the goals. So there's no sample goals that are ever going to be correct for everybody in every instance. You have to decide where are your child's breakdowns, and then you write a goal to address those specific areas of breakdown. But these are good samples, and I know we all love seeing samples because it gives us something, a starting point. So if you have your IEPs, this is a good time to take a look at your child's goals. And what you need to ask are two questions. Are they connected to your child's identified needs? So can you make a direct connection back to the present level section? And the areas of the present level that were written as, struggling with, below grade level, not meeting benchmark, deficit in this, can you see goals that are written specifically to address those needs? And are those goals written in such a way that they're measurable in an objective way, and because of the way we've written them, they're actually going to drive the type of instruction that's needed in the classroom. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about what that means as we move into the next section, okay? So there is a handout available on goals, and it is a little sheet that can get you prepared to ask questions and kind of have your thoughts together when you go into the meeting to talk about the different areas that you want to see addressed based on the goals. So you can take a look at that at your leisure. So the question that I said you need to think about is, are the goals written in a way that's going to drive the individual instruction? Okay, so the part of the IEP where you start to see mention of services and instruction, it's usually, and it's called something different in the different types of IEP programs, but sometimes it's called a statement of services. In other states, it's called the modifications and accommodations section. But whatever it's called on your document, it's the part of the IEP that actually starts to talk about what are the conditions that this child requires in order to learn efficiently and effectively. Right? So it's the part of the IEP that starts to mention instructional practices, strategies, modifications, and the accommodations. So there are two things that are important to understand about this section, right? So special education is legally defined as specially designed instruction to meet the unique needs of the child. So if your child qualifies for an IEP, that means they are legally entitled to special education, and that means specially designed instruction to meet their unique needs, okay? And then if you go further and you look at how specially designed instruction is legally defined, that says that specially designed instruction includes adapted content, methodology, and delivery of service. So to us parents that have children with dyslexia, really important to understand that our children have a right to specially designed methodology and for the delivery of that methodology to be specially designed for them. Okay, and all of this information, let's see where the new handout, so the new handout button pops up here. There is a handout in the section of the materials that talks about, I think it's called terminology, and all of those sections of the Federal Register and the definition in IDEA about special education and specially designed instruction, they're all highlighted on that terminology document. So you can actually go in and read the accurate wording and things like that. Okay? So let me keep going here? So when we talk about methodology, this can be really frustrating. This can be the most frustrating part of the IEP, right? Because we know that we're hoping that this IEP is going to mention something about the specific reading instruction that our children are going to need help with. And a lot of times you will hear a school district say, you know, I'm not legally allowed to, you know, put a reading program into an IEP. I can't put the name. And this is kind of the rule of thumb. Like, yeah, technically they're not going to put the name of a reading program into an IEP because, you know, what if, you know, the next, you know, somewhere through the school year you find out that the reading program isn't working for the child, or maybe the teacher who's trained in that reading program leaves, and then all of a sudden you have a legal document that is saying this branded reading program is the one that must be used. So they tend to stay away from that, and law supports them staying away from that. But what does happen is that case law, so parents who have filed claims against school districts and have gone to court to dispute things, and they've gotten rulings, that's what case law is. Case law actually recognizes that instructional methodology can be an important consideration in the IEPs of students that fall under the category of specific learning disability, okay? But what it also recognizes is that courts will not substitute a parentally preferred methodology over what the school district is recommending. So important concept to understand here. Just because we are saying it's what's needed, right? So think back to the positions versus interests part of this presentation. Just because we're saying this is what we want, right, there's nothing in the law to support that the school district has to do that, okay? But what it does say is that a child with a learning disability who has not learned to read using the traditional instructional methods may require some other instructional strategy. So this is why you're talking about the why. Okay, so my child is in 4th grade. He's been using the district's reading program for the last 4 years, and we still are seeing, based on his progress monitoring data, that his decoding skills are weak, and he is not at grade level fluency in either rate or accuracy. We may need to look at some other instructional strategies, and they may need to be a methodology that does this, this, and this. Okay, so this is how the conversation goes. This is how you move from your child's areas of need to goals, and then the goals are written in a way, oh, remember John? He actually needed to improve vowel use of letter sound correspondence, understanding short vowel sounds in connected text. He needed to understand syllable types. Wow, I don't think the program that we've been using actually even addresses syllable types, does it? Is it structured that way? So I'm kind of just talking you through this a little bit. This is what you're trying to do. You're trying to move them in the direction of understanding that this child has an area of need, that the program that's previously been chosen doesn't even address those areas of need. And my goodness, if I'm going to have to show that the child has met this goal, then I'm going to need to actually teach to that goal. And the current program we have doesn't really address it. So what else? What else? So nothing in the definition of specially designed instruction requires that instructional methodology be addressed in the IEPs of students who do not need a particular instructional methodology in order to receive educational benefit. So basically what this is saying is that if your child is not learning to read based on the traditional instructional methods, then the specially designed instruction probably means you need to start looking at a different kind of program. But in a general sense, like if your child has an IEP because they have, you know, cerebral palsy or ADHD or some other deficit that's not related to their ability to learn to read, then they probably aren't entitled to a special reading program as part of their specially designed instruction. But if the disability and the area of need actually has to do with reading, then that's where it comes into play, and it says, well, then methodology needs to be considered. Okay, so you may be the one on that team that has to make all of these connections, right? So if the school district says we don't tend to talk about methodology in IEPs, then you need to be the one that makes the point. but that's my child's disability. My child's disability is in the area of reading, and my child hasn't made progress in the reading skills that they need to make progress in with the methodology that you have been using. What do we do next? Okay, so it's the team's decision to decide whether or not methodology is going to be addressed in the IEP, and you have a better chance of having that be a favorable decision to think about methodology if you've connected all the dots for them. And that's what I'm hoping this webinar does for you, helps you learn how to start to connect those dots. This is usually the stage where I like to say, please don't get angry with me. I know how hard this is. I know that it feels like you're moving a mountain to do this level of work, but I'm hoping that I'm opening your eyes to kind of what has to happen in order to get there. We at Learning Ally get calls from parents every single day, and they just want to know, like, how do I get OG into my child's IEP? And I wish there was an easy answer. I wish it was, oh, well, just make sure they say dyslexia in the IEP, and if they say dyslexia, then they're going to have to give you OG. It's not that simple. You really, it's the needs. It's the child's individual needs that drive what should be put into an IEP, and it really is through all of this hard work of connecting the dots that you can get it in there. And you can. I will say you can get it in there. My child's IEPs actually do have Orton-Gillingham-based instruction listed because I did a lot of hard work in tying it back to their areas of needs over the years. Okay, so again, there's that handout in there called Terminology, and it has a lot of good references to where all of this stuff is mentioned in law and in the Federal Register. So again, I said a lot of school districts are not going to put the name of a packaged reading program in there, but what you can hope to do is start describing the methodology that would be needed. So maybe you're going to word it as a multisensory structured language program or an Orton-Gillingham approach. You might need to describe the teaching techniques that are explicit, direct, cumulative, intensive, and systematically focused on the structure of the English language. And all of these things tie back to those goals that I gave you as samples, right? Because we talked about letter sound correspondence, we talked about having to reach a level of mastery, we talked about syllable instruction. So those are structured language programs that teach those skills. Okay. Sometimes you are also going to talk about the multisensory part, right? So a program that coordinates the use of visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and tactile pathways that are going to enhance memory and learning of the written language, or that the program needs to consistently reinforce the symbols the student sees, the sounds the student hears, and the actions that they can feel. So there also is a handout in the section that gives a full description of the methodology that is recommended for students that have word level deficits or dyslexia, so you can look at some of the language that's in those descriptions. But here's a good time to talk about the multisensory piece. Important for parents to know that currently the research does not the research is not there to prove that the multisensory part of these programs are actually what's helping. So, you know, years of use, looking at what happens in private LD schools, if anyone teaches one of these programs themselves, like, we know that the multisensory part is really great because it does reinforce a lot of these skills in very specific ways, but it is important to know that there isn't research out there at present to support that. The evidence that is out there supports the structured language piece, right? That direct, explicit instruction, cumulative, systematic. When you see research studies that support that kind of programming, it's all focused on the structured language piece. There's not really enough right now to say the multisensory. So sometimes if you have a school district that's really well versed in this stuff, you might get some pushback on that, and I share this information with you just so that you understand. You know, it is the structured language piece that is evidence-based, okay? So now we're just going to start talking about some different parts of the IEP that you can use to your advantage, right? So there is a part of the IEP where parental concerns can be documented. And you should know that you should be using this section of the IEP to document, document, document. So if you have a present level section that does not have good data in it, and they're telling you that they're not going to put any more data in it, you need to document it in this part of the IEP to say, you know, parent has a concern that the current present levels of performance section does not give adequate data to know where this child is as a starting point, so that at the end of the school year we know what kind of progress has actually been made. You can write that in. You can write in the kinds of data you want them to include, okay? You can talk about the goals if you don't feel that they took into consideration areas of need that you think are there and you need to have goals developed around them. And you can also use this section to talk about the instructional, the specially designed instructional strategies. If you don't believe that they have matched instructional strategies that are going to work for the goals that you know are going to be needed for your child, this is an area where you can get all of that information in. And documenting this stuff along the way is very, very important, because if you get to the point where you actually need to file for mediation or file a complaint or go to due process, it really is the documentation that carries the way. I mean, it's nice to be able to testify and do that kind of stuff, but these hearing officers, they're really, really looking at the documentation. So this would be where you need to show that you've been asking for this kind of stuff along the way, and the district has been having, you know, adverse reactions to it or whatever. So use your parental concern section. It also is a great place to document if the district is one of these schools or you know, districts that only likes to say specific learning disability. If you have outside evaluation or private evaluations that actually document that it's been diagnosed as dyslexia, you know, don't stress over, you know, some parents are always like, oh, they won't acknowledge the dyslexia, they only say specific learning disability. Like, I tend to tell parents, like, that's not your battle. The battle is not whether they're using the word dyslexia or not, because you can always get it in there. You can put it in on the parental concern section. You can say, you know, parents want it noted that an outside private evaluator assessed the areas of need and have shown that this is representative of dyslexia, or this is the pattern of strengths and weaknesses that is typical of dyslexia, or has been diagnosed with dyslexia. You can get that in there in this section, but again, it's not the term dyslexia that determines the type of interventions that are put in place. It's the needs, and you need to make sure that the needs are clearly outlined, and you can outline the needs that will be characteristic of dyslexia without ever using the word. Okay, so next is progress monitoring, right? So this is something that we have to be thinking about through that whole IEP process, because it's not just what happens after the IEP is in place. You need to be thinking about it while you're developing the IEP, because you might be writing about it in the IEP. You might be documenting it. Okay, so progress monitoring is important because it keeps everyone focused on the data, and I don't need to go over this again because I already mentioned it resolves some of the interpersonal stressors that can happen because it's not one person's opinion over the other. It's let the data show us, right? If the school district is telling you you don't need a special methodology, then you turn to the data and you say, okay, well, if you're going to use this reading program, what kind of progress monitoring are we going to do for his decoding skills? What kind of progress monitoring are you going to do to make sure that he's actually learning the syllable types? And then you use the data to show whether the program they've chosen has actually moved the needle on those skills. Okay, so objective data, objective data. I can't say that enough. Okay, it's one of the most important things you can have in place. Progress monitoring also builds in frequent communication into the process. So typically in your IEP, there is a section that talks about progress monitoring, but it's really specific to what IDEA says about progress monitoring, which is that a student has a right to, or a parent has a right to see progress monitoring results as often as non-disabled peers get progress monitoring results. So this would mean report card time. When everybody gets a report card, parents of students with disabilities have the right to get a report card basically that talks about their individual plan. How are they doing on their individual goals in addition to their regular class subjects, right? And sometimes it even applies, like if a school district sends out progress reports before the report card comes home, when those progress reports go out and you see how they're doing in all their individual subjects, you should also be getting a progress report on their goals. How are they doing towards meeting their IEP goals, okay? So it's sort of is pretty broad and could be infrequent if you just left it at that. But what I would recommend is you talk to your team about building in additional progress monitoring. If we have children that are struggling in the area of reading, we need to be getting results. We need to be getting progress that shows us how they're doing on these discrete skills way more frequently than once a quarter. You know, my son gets it weekly. I get a weekly Dibbles probe, right? And it gets sent home, and I see how many words per minute there he's reading. I see what the grade level passage is, and I see how accurate he is. What's his accuracy percentage? So I get that weekly. You could get it, you know, I see it done in different ways. Sometimes it's done every 10 lessons. Sometimes it's done weekly. Sometimes it's done twice a month. Sometimes it's once a month. So you decide that with your team and get it documented in there so that in your legal document, it actually says how often they have to do it and how often you're going to see it. So they do the progress monitoring for my son once a week, but I get a report once a month. That's how we wrote it into my IEP. So every month I get a report that shows 4 progress monitoring probes. And it's important to understand how much you need to focus on progress monitoring, because that's actually how we know if the services are working or not, right? If we're not getting regular reports on our child's progress, we don't even know if that IEP is written correctly. We don't know if the instructional strategies being used are the correct ones for our kids. So that's another way. If the district is resistant to doing progress monitoring, that's how I usually talk about it with them. Well, I don't understand. If you're not going to do progress monitoring, how are we going to know if this IEP is working or not? You know, it doesn't make sense to me to wait until the end of the school year to see if they've mastered their goals. Or, well, wouldn't it be important to see this all along the way? Because what if they master the goal by, you know, December? Then we're going to need to raise the goal. You know, so it's all focused on understanding if the services that are in place are working, and that's why we need to see the progress monitoring on a regular basis. Some other considerations really important for IEPs that are related to dyslexia. Assistive technology. Huge, huge, huge. We know that our kids have isolated areas of weakness, and they probably have other areas of strength that we can be building upon. So what assistive technology tools can we put in place for these students to help mitigate their areas of weakness? And that means, you know, help them get over them, right? Not be held back by them. And a lot of times you can ask for assistive technology evaluations to find out what the child's breakdowns are, and then test different types of technology tools with them to see which ones actually have an impact on helping them either show what they know more effectively or access what they need to access more efficiently. So definitely want to be making sure that assistive technology is discussed when we're developing IEPs, and if we find that certain assistive technologies are going to be helpful, then we need to write them in there, and we need to decide what is the school providing, what are the parents providing, like what what is that about? And I say that, and some parents might be like, what are you talking about the school? If it's in the IEP, the school's required to provide it. And that is absolutely true. The school is required to provide whatever is needed to meet that child's areas of need. But in this day and age, I am a very practical person, and I know if you're getting resistance and it's going to be a huge fight, if you have the ability to say, well, my child can bring their own iPad in, or he can use his phone for this, I'm all for putting that stuff on the table, because it's really about getting the child what he needs. And I say focus on that, but you know what the law says. The school district is responsible to provide it, so if you need to go that route, then you push that route. But it's all about picking your battles and finding out what you have to stand your ground on, and what are the areas that you're willing to kind of have some wiggle room and negotiate with them. There's also a section of the IEP that supports for school personnel. Really, really important part of the IEP, particularly if the district does not have staff members that are really well trained in these types of reading interventions. So say you have the Wilson language program is being used for your child, but the results have not been very positive, and you find out that the teacher hasn't had the level of training that's needed. This is the section where you can go in and say, I don't really think he's making as much progress with this reading program as he could be making. It seems like he's not progressing at the rate that we would expect. Do you feel that the teacher would benefit from having some additional training in this area? Or maybe there's like a OG fellow that's teaching at a school district, and you don't happen to get that teacher, but you get another teacher. Maybe there could be the OG teacher working in combination with the teacher that your child is seeing, and there's some coaching going on, or some overview of the instructional delivery, things like that. So use that supports for school personnel section. You can get some good things in place for your child's teacher in that area. Extended school, or also maybe it's dyslexia awareness. You feel like the teacher needs to kind of understand this learning disability a little deeper, because she's acknowledged that she doesn't think she's ever taught a dyslexic student before. I hear that one a lot, which sometimes it's teachers that have 20-year careers, and I don't think I've ever taught a dyslexic student before. So you can use that in creative ways. There's the extended school year portion of the IEP, and oh my goodness, we could do a whole nother webinar that's like an hour long on extended school year, but I'm not going to do that here. I'm just going to let you know that that part of the IEP is not just about summer supports. Extended school year actually could be like before school tutoring, after school tutoring, like an extended school day type of situation. It can be used in a broader sense. But what's important to know about the summer extended school year program is, yeah, a lot of times it gets offered, and the important thing to ask there is, what's the reading program that's happening in that session? Because it's really, I have found it's not been worth my child's time to participate in the school's extended school year program if they're not using the correct methodology. And sometimes I've even said, you know what, we're going to continue with our private tutoring over the summer. Could we make the extended school year focused on math? Like, could we work on the multiplication tables during extended school year time instead of worrying about literacy? And, I've gotten to the point where I have a pretty good working relationship with my team now, so I have the ability to talk about some of these things with them and get them implemented. But extended school year, you always want to know what's happening in that extended school year program, because it really might not be worth your child's time if it's not the correct type of methodology. And extended school year is intended to continue to keep the child from regressing, but it can also be used if the child is on the brink of making a breakthrough in a certain skill acquisition. So if they've just actually started decoding certain syllable types with mastery, and there's a history of them losing skills over school breaks and holidays and things like that, you can make the case that they're at the stage of emerging skills, and if we stop over the summer, they're not going to they're going to regress, but they're also not going to be continuing to build on these skills that they're at the brink of learning. So there's a whole lot of stuff going around extended school year, but I just like families of dyslexic students to understand those two factors, right? So not just summer, it could be an extended day situation, and if you're getting that, what matters is the type of instruction that's happening there. And then there's the section about participation in assessment. This has to do with district assessments as well as state assessments. So you want to make sure that you have full understanding of the type of accommodations that are going to be needed in those situations and that they're all documented appropriately. A hot button topic, I know. Parents have very, very different feelings about the accommodations, especially around read aloud, really, really hot. I happen to be a parent that actually wants an accurate representation of my child's, reading comprehension skills. So I don't want to see my child have the read aloud on the passages because I want the school to actually get an accurate response back. If my kid can't read that passage, then I want you to see that they can't read the passage. And that's a very, very personal decision because there are other parents that may feel that we already know that my child can't do this and it's been properly documented and it's good to go, so I don't want them suffering through a test and having to, do that. A lot of issues around how they participate in assessments. Some of them are very personal and some of them really do depend on what the school or state or test, how the test is standardized can sometimes make a decision on whether a certain accommodation is allowable or not. So a lot of issues there to be well versed in. So there's a part of the IEP that's called the Notice of Recommended Educational Placement. And it can be called different things on different IEPs, but ideally this is kind of the overarching title for it. It's the place where you're basically agreeing to the child's placement, the goals that have been developed, and the specially designed instruction that has been decided upon, right? So it's the part of the IEP where it usually says like certain options were considered, but we've decided to reject them, right? So this is another place where you need to be absolutely sure that anything that you asked about, right? If you asked about a structured language methodology because your child has weak decoding skills and poor fluency, if the district has said no, you need to document in this section that you asked for this, and the district needs to, in writing, tell why they rejected it. And look closely at that, because if they say, we're rejecting it because, we don't believe the student has an area of need for this, you need to make sure in your parental concern section you're saying, the district's saying they refused this because my son doesn't need it, but evaluation reports show that they have this need, however you would word that. But very important section, because if it comes back to a point of like, why was something offered, why was it not offered, you want to make sure that you understand why the district is saying no to things, okay? Or maybe they say no to it because we feel our program is appropriate. And now you have documentation that if it shows to not be appropriate, you can go back and say, well, I'm going to ask for this again because you said no the first time because you thought your program was appropriate. But now because of our progress monitoring data, we say we can see that it's not appropriate. So let me ask for this again. Okay, and then there's also a part where you would describe the different procedures, the tests, the records or reports, or whatever factors were used in determining the proposed action. So if they said no to something, they have to say why they said no, and they should be giving details about what backs up that decision. Okay, so good part of the IEP to understand and use appropriately. Now, what if you develop this IEP and you find that you're not totally in agreement with it, or there are parts of it that you outright do not feel are appropriate, or there's no goals written, or whatever it might be. There are procedural safeguards that are built into the Individuals with Disability in Education Act. And here's a bullet point of them. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, because this is the processes look different in different states, but there's something called a facilitated IEP in certain states, and this would be the ability to have a facilitator come in and help with the development of the IEP to work through the different sections that you guys are disputing over. There is mediation. Mediation means that there is a third-party mediator, like a nonpartisan person who comes in to help you talk through the issues, hopefully to help move you towards resolution. There's something called a resolution meeting, and this happens if you request mediation or due process. There's something written in that says that the district actually has the right to call a resolution meeting within 15 days to actually try one more time to resolve the issue with the parents directly. Now, this doesn't always have to happen because the district decides whether they want to use it or not, but that's another place where you can try to resolve differences. There's due process. Due process is where you're actually going to court, or you're filing, sometimes it's like litigation. It's basically where there's a third party who's going to make a decision. They're going to hear both sides and make a determination as to what the ruling is going to be. Okay, and that's a whole process, and it's very different in every state how that process works. And then there's the ability to file a state complaint. You would file state complaints when there are procedural breakdowns, right? You're not going to file a state complaint because you don't agree with the goals, but you would file a state complaint if there are no goals in the IEP. So it has to sort of be a procedural breakdown. The law's not being followed. That's when you would file a state complaint. If you have more philosophical problems with the IEP, you're not agreeing on methodology, you're not agreeing on the goals, you don't believe that the accommodations are appropriate, those would be things that you would do through mediation due process, right, where you would get into the meat of the matter and really talk about the child's needs. State complaints don't go that deep. They're more procedurally based. So here are some tips that you could think about to help keep you on track when you're being this equal team member, right? If you have questions about reading programs particularly, because this is a big one. At Learning Ally, we are constantly asked about reading programs. And there's a lot to know, and there's so many programs out there. How do you know if one's appropriate or not? One recommendation that we give all the time is to contact the publisher directly. Ask to see their protocols. Ask them if this has been designed for students with dyslexia. Ask if it's been designed for students that have decoding and fluency problems. And ask to see any published reports that they have on this. So it can be really, really valuable to reach out to the source to understand better about how these programs were designed and what they're intended to do. Do your own research on evaluation and progress monitoring tools. Okay, sometimes it really can make the difference if a district is telling you, like, oh, they're doing fine, it happened once with my son. They told me, oh, he's doing great on Dibbles, he's making all of his benchmarks. And luckily I happened to be trained in Dibbles, so I went back and I said, really, that doesn't make sense to me. I don't think that he is performing well enough to be making benchmark. I said, could you tell me, how many letter sounds that he could get correct on that probe in 1 minute? And she came back to me and she said, oh, we're not timing them. And I said, oh, well, that's interesting because Dibbles is standardized and that requires that you do it in a 1 minute time frame. So it's important to understand the progress monitoring tools so that you know what the results mean when they come back. Talk to other parents in your school and also in your state. Important to talk to other parents in your school because you can find out about things that kids have gotten in their IEPs that you might not have been considering. You can find out about what's happening in a resource room that you might not have been aware of. In my district, there was a whole issue around my son getting Orton-Gillingham instruction in a resource room, and the district was telling another family that they didn't have Orton-Gillingham. And I was able to share with that parent that actually we do. We have have a really great teacher who's trained in Orton Gillingham, and it could be beneficial for you to ask about this. So talk to other parents. Talk to other parents in your state, because you can learn a lot about state education codes and different practices, and sometimes you can get a sense for like within a school district, what are the things they tend to do, what are the trends that tend to happen, and you're better prepared to go into your meetings. Consider what is needed from outside supports also. And I mentioned a little bit about that when I say pick your battles, right? If you can get stuck in the mire, like you can be really weighted down with like, well, they're supposed to do it, so I'm going to stand my ground. But if you're really doing this child focus, if you have the resources to do some of this stuff, then you're going to do this stuff. You're going to get this stuff in place, and you're going to document it. You're going to have it written into that IEP. As my son says, he's also receiving 2 hours of specialized Orton Gillingham instruction twice a week, all of this, and I put that in there because that's part of understanding what's been happening for him. And I'm happy to put in there that the parent is providing this. I'm not expecting the school to come back and do it, but I make sure that I actually document that kind of stuff. It's all about developing good relationships, because you can have the best IEP in the world where every T is crossed and every I is dotted and it's fabulous, but it actually is, there are human beings that have to deliver that have to implement that IEP. And if you have destroyed the relationship, then I would be really nervous about the quality of that implementation. So I always say it is about crafting a beautiful document, but it's also about building relationships that are respectful and mutually trusting, right? So working towards that is really important. And it's also your job to keep that team focused on solutions, right? We talked about that earlier when we were saying that child-focused, interest-based negotiating. So there is a document in the handout section of the platform that will allow you to have a little cheat sheet for actually developing a highlights document from your kid's IEP. So this is something that might be great to try over the summer. Look at your kid's IEP and then download this little form, and this is something that I do every year. I know that the teachers have 30 plus kids in their class, and I don't know how many of them have IEPs or 504 plans, but it's not realistic to think that that teacher is reading every page of a 30-page IEP. So what I do is I go through the IEP and I pick out the highlights. These are the accommodations that are important. This is where he is in fluency, and we're trying to get him to this. Anything that I really think needs to be at the top of that teacher's mind is what I'm putting in that document. And I also talk a lot about my kids. I tell them who they are, what they like, how they can connect, how you can connect to them well in the classroom, what their strengths are, because I really want next year's teacher to build a connection as quickly as possible with my child and understand what's important to me and what are the important aspects of this document that we spent so much time developing. So I leave you tonight with some questions that you might want to ask your team. Do you feel that we have enough information in order to understand our starting point? So this is all about that present level section, okay? So if you feel that yours is pretty crappy, this is the question you ask. I'm concerned about our present level section of the IEP. Do we all feel confident that we have enough information, enough data here to actually know where Johnny is starting from, so that at the end of the year when we look at his progress, we can actually show that he's made enough movement? Like, I'm not getting a clear picture to see where his starting point is. Have we addressed all of my child's needs? This would be a question to ask if you see things that are in that present level section that have not translated into goals, and you call them out. You say, well, I noticed that it mentions, he really has problems, spelling independently, but I don't see any goal here that relates to that at all, okay? What type of specialized instruction is going to be needed to keep my child making progress towards these goals? Okay, so this is after you have goals that are really specific to those areas of need, right? And you might be talking about letter sound correspondence. You might be talking about phonological skills. You might be talking about reading accuracy. And you say, This reading program that you're suggesting, is that going to address, decoding words in isolation? Is that going to address letter sound correspondence? Tell me more about that. What type of accommodations are needed so that my child can access grade level materials and demonstrate proficiency? Oh, wow. Well, I have a seventh grader, but his reading level is only at the third grade level. How is he going to keep up in science and social studies? How are we going to do that? Are there tools that we can put in place so that he can access the seventh grade science book? Explain to me what these accommodations are going to do for him. And how will we communicate progress regularly so that we can make good instructional decisions? And I talked a lot about that when we talked about progress monitoring, right? How are we going to communicate with each other? How are we going to keep up to speed on a regular basis about how they're progressing towards these goals? So that brings us to the end of the presentation. These are some of the services that we have available at Learning Ally, and I hope that you have all been taking advantage of some of these things. We have our wonderful parent support specialists, and Jennifer, who is our host tonight, she's one of them. She's out in California. And these are all moms that are raising kids with dyslexia, and they are available to take phone consultations and to talk through all areas of what it's like being on this journey. So please call our 800 number if you need their services. We have webinars and events like this all the time, so keep a check on our community calendar. We have youth services that launched last year. We have a website that's going to be launching, I think, this week, if we keep our fingers crossed, which is all video-based, and it's kids who made videos for other kids, and it's all about self-advocacy and how to communicate with teachers and how to build a support network around yourself. It's really going to be fabulous. We have sections on our website that's an Ask a Parent forum where you can type in questions and our parent support specialists will answer you. And we also have our Facebook Learning Ally Parent Chat. We have specialist directories if you're looking for someone to evaluate your child, and we also have a reading tutor network that you can search by state, and these are all reading tutors who are trained in multisensory structured language programs, and they've already been vetted, so you can be assured that these tutors know their stuff. We have a community e-newsletter that's focused on families, and there's lots of great things in there for parents to share with kids. There's a scholarship program called the National Achievement Award Program for students that are entering college, and of course we have our audiobook library with over 80,000 titles that are read by our wonderful volunteers all across the country. So thank you so much. I see that we do have a minute or two left, so if there are any questions, Jen, if you want to shoot some questions for me.
Yeah, we actually have Denise has her hand up, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute Denise.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, Denise. Can you hear us? Hello?
Is Denise there?
No, maybe she just has her hand up by accident.
Okay. Were there any questions in the chat box?
There's no questions in the chat, but they can type them in now if they have one.
Okay.
Let's see here. Nothing so far. It's so much to take in, Deborah.
I know. I think I talked them all into sleep. I talked them all to sleep.
It's just, I don't think they're asleep. I think their heads are spinning. I mean, it's just a lot to take in, and that's why the recording is going to be coming out. It's going to give everybody the opportunity to kind of, process some of this and look through their own paperwork and stuff. And then, again, like you said, we're available 5 days a week. So they just have to give us a call. We do have a question now that just came in. So, do you have any suggestions for addressing the reading needs of a middle school student currently in the 7th grade who has received in-class support, accommodations, and modifications since 5th grade when she left the pull-out resource room?
Geez, it's going to be really hard to answer this question because I'm not sure what you mean by reading needs. Again, this would be an example of having to go back to see what the actual needs are in order to answer that question. I guess in general what I would say is if your child actually still has needs around decoding and fluency because it's impacting their comprehension, then I guess sometimes parents get confused because they think it's not worth going back and working on those skills once a kid gets a bit older. older, but that's actually false. If the child is actually not able to understand what they're reading because they have those underlying deficits, it is still worth going in and giving them remediation in those areas. Now, if they still struggle in those areas, but they're actually able to compensate and they comprehend really well, then I would say, maybe it's not worth your time spending so much time at the word level anymore. I would continue with all of the great strategies that they've been using to read well, and look for other accommodations and supports to put in place there. Maybe work on fluency more at that time. But I'm sorry, it's hard to answer that question without knowing what the specific areas of need in reading are.
Right, exactly. So then we actually have another one too. How can you find an advocate to go with you to an IEP meeting? What's a good way to track one down?
Absolutely. So the best thing that you can do, every state has what's called a Parent Training and Information Center that is federally funded by the US DOE. And you need to find out who that parent training center is in your state, and you need to give them a call, and you need to ask them for their referral list of advocates in the state. Another thing that's good to do is connect with other parents in the dyslexia space and ask them for referrals, because you can have really, really great advocates that understand the special education law piece of it, but they might not understand the reading instruction piece. And you want to find someone who has both. So the best thing to do is start with a list of recommended advocates, and then talk to other parents about that list and find the ones that really know learning disabilities well.
Yeah, and you definitely need to do a really good, thorough interview with that advocate before you agree to bring them to a meeting, because you don't want to find out in the meeting that they do not understand dyslexia. So
Mhm.
do a
Mhm.
good interview. So if you have an IEP and it doesn't have any of this stuff in it, what can you do? Can you get it revised
Oh,
or
absolutely. So if you have questions about your IEP, you can call an IEP meeting at any time. You just send a letter to your case manager and let them know. And I would give them a heads up. I would say, I have concerns about this, this, and this. I would like to schedule a meeting to come back and discuss. And just walk them through the sections. And again, you're not angry, you're not mad that this stuff isn't in the IEP, right? You have questions, you have concerns, you need to talk this through. I'm not understanding why this data is not in here. If, oh, you didn't collect the data, is it possible to start collecting this information? I think it would be really important that we understand this and are keeping track of this stuff. So yeah, you can call an IEP meeting at any time and come back in to take a look at it. It's a living document and it can be amended at any time.
okay? And then Erica has her hand up, so I'm going to unmute Erica and let's see if we can hear Erica.
Okay.
Hi, Erica. Can you hear us? Give her a second. Get unmuted. Holly has her hand up. Let me unmute Holly. Hi, Holly. Can you hear us? Everybody, Holly and Erica are both have muted themselves. So if you click on your green microphone, you can unmute. There's Holly. Hi, Holly.
Hi. What is some of the best apps for like iPads and such to download for kids to use who are dyslexic or having trouble with reading?
Oh, you are asking the wrong person at Learning Ally. I am not really strong on the assistive technology stuff, but I will say with my own son, he's in 5th grade, and of course he uses Learning Ally, and he also uses Dragon Dictation. That's been a really big one for him because he has pretty significant dysgraphia also. Like his writing is really slow and belabored, so the ability to just get his thoughts out quickly by using speech-to-text technology has been really helpful. And I have found that Dragon Dictation app is pretty good. It really he didn't need to do a lot of voice training with it. It's pretty sensitive to his voice.
And the kid webinar, the student to student webinar we just did actually has a good handout in it with all different types of information on assistive technology. So if you call member services or call our 800 number, the 800-635-1403, we can send that handout out to you, and it's got a lot of really good resources. And I actually refer a lot of people to the work that Jamie Martin is doing because he's kind of on top of all that
Yeah,
stuff. So,
and there's one of our National Achievement Award winners from last year, Brian Mearsma. He has an
yes,
awesome blog. I don't know the name of it right now, but we can put it out on the Learning Ally Facebook parent chat place. But he has an
right.
awesome blog. He reviews all different assistive technology tools around dyslexia and puts them up on his website there.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
I like it. Okay, so then Caroline has her hand up. So let me unmute Caroline.
I'm sorry, this is Erica.
Oh, Erica,
Oh,
go
hi,
ahead.
Erica.
Hi, how you guys doing?
I'm super. How are you?
Good, I'm good. I just wanted to pretty much give some information out to parents or to you guys that are on the call tonight. I'm currently in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we have a Parents Academy at the Church of Christian Compassion located in Southwest Philadelphia. And I currently work with Dr. York Williams. He's a special education PhD professor at Westchester. So what it is that we do, we hold parents symposiums every fourth week, every fourth Saturday of the month.
Erica, I'm going to stop you for 1 second. Would it be possible for you to share this information on our Facebook parent chat section? This is a national webinar, so we have a lot of people here from across the country, and some of this information might not necessarily be pertinent to them. So instead of using time up in this forum, could you share it on our Facebook page so that people that live in the area, that would be really relevant to them, and they could take a closer look?
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I know we're going to be cut off of this platform soon, and I want to try to get as many questions answered for people as I can.
Okay, and then one of our last questions is going to be from Caroline. Caroline, can you hear us? You're unmuted. Hi, Caroline, can you hear us? No, I don't. Maybe she's not. She's unmuted, but we can't hear her. Okay,
I see a question in the box. Is Learning Ally considered an assistive technology? It's audiobooks. Audiobooks would be considered the assistive technology, and sometimes they'll write in Learning Ally. Sometimes they just put the broader term, the audio accessible instructional material. So that's how that works. Let's see what else.
And then we have another one. Any resources for IEP implementation for someone that's in the juvenile justice system?
Wow. That's a tough one. I know special education can be so tricky in the juvenile justice system because I believe in certain states or maybe all, you have to have already qualified for special education before you came in. They're not really doing the evaluations there.
That's a good one for the parent centers, Deborah, because it's different in each state.
Yeah, it's a really good one for the parent training and information centers to go there and ask those questions. It's a very tricky subject because even education in general in those centers can be hit or miss. Not even talking about special education. Going down that route is a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Oh, so, thank you. I saw Eileen put Brian's blog link in the chat box, so thank you for doing that, Eileen.
So let's see. Do you have any suggestions when a school psychologist evaluated my child with a low IQ with a major inconsistencies in the individual performance test numbers? So what if you don't agree with this testing? It looks like it's a little like the parent's not so sure about that testing.
Well, if you have a dispute with the school's testing, you always have the right to ask for an independent educational evaluation. So that is something that you could try if you feel like you need to have someone independently do this work and take a look at your child. But another thing to consider is that dyslexia is independent of IQ, right? So you could have a whole different range of IQs and there could still be these phonological and orthographic processing issues. So that, you may find that it's difficult for someone to give the label dyslexia because of they're saying that the IQ is so low and that's what's causing these other problems in reading. But the interventions are the same, right? So whatever deficits showed up, irregardless of what the IQ number says, you need to have goals and programming that address the areas of weakness, the areas of need. So you do want to focus everybody on that. I'm not sure if that got at the heart of what your question is, but important to know that dyslexia is independent of IQ.
Okay, and then this is an interesting one because this is kind of a trendy thing that all the schools now, they can throw some multisensory in there, no problem. So the question is, my son's district provides multisensory techniques to teach spelling, but not structured language. What's the difference between spelling and reading, and are they not connected? Or
Oh no, spelling and reading are intimately connected. Decoding and encoding, which is the name for spelling, they're kind of like reciprocal processes there. And in these structured language programs, you are actually teaching a child to decode the words. So they're looking at each letter and building that building that word back, decoding the word. And then the reverse process, you're giving them the word auditorily, and they have to break it down into its individual sounds to spell it. So those processes work hand in hand, and in structured language programs, they're taught that way. So that's what, that's how those processes work together. And I agree with you. The multisensory label gets thrown around so much, even from parents. And I warn parents, do not go in and ask for a multisensory reading program, because you never know what you're going to get. You could have these crazy, singing songs and writing in the air and all of this stuff, and that's not what the evidence supports right now. The evidence is there to show the structured language piece. So you need to see programs that are teaching letter sound correspondence. You need to see programs that are teaching the syllable types, teaching morphology, teaching syntax and semantics. You need to see a program that really starts with the smallest basics, the smallest sounds in words, moving up to the biggest sections of words that have meaning, and they teach them very systematic and cumulatively. If it's just like these, tapping and some of the good programs have these multisensory techniques in them, but if all you're getting are the multisensory techniques, that's not the kind of program we're talking about.
Last question, Deborah, for the night. I am interested on how to make sure that the general ed teacher is following the IEP, and as well as what you ask an advocate to determine whether or not they are one. So, like, how would you really ask an advocate, what do you ask, I guess, is the biggest thing. But really, I think the most important part about this question is, how do you get your gen ed teacher to even understand it all and follow it?
I just want to make mention, I'm seeing a lot of names in the chat box of people that I know, and I'm so honored that you came to this webinar tonight. So I see Eileen, and I see Megan that I just met recently, and a bunch of people. So thanks for coming out tonight, guys. But anyway, so how do you tell if a general education teacher is following the IEP? Again, progress monitoring, right? So ultimately, you're going to know if an IEP is being followed because the progress would be there. Another thing you can do is ask to come in to observe, maybe reading group time or something like that. And then hopefully you just are developing a good relationship with the teacher, that you're in there a lot and you're asking questions and you're asking her to describe your students' behaviors and what she's seeing in the classroom. So I think I would really, I would just say, if it has to go beyond progress monitoring and observations, you want to be communicating a lot with the gen ed teacher. Like, how are the accommodations working? Do you find that he's using his iPad? Do you think, how's his reading group going? Do you think you have him at the right level? Would you like me to try something different at home? How can I support what you're doing? Just really trying to get a good dialogue going with the teacher so that you can just pop in and ask a ton of questions. And
right.
And then what was the second part of the question? The advocate. Oh, yeah.
Like, how do you figure out if the advocate?
There's no real profession out there to say is this advocate it's not like a lawyer that you would know. So it really goes back to what I said before. You want to ask a lot of questions of people in your local area, and tend to find that the good advocates have really good reputations following them. So you want to do that. Definitely going through the parent training and information centers for their referral lists, because they really know, right? They hear a lot of stuff that's going on across your state, and they would know like who to tell you to stay away from or who's really good. And Jen, you had the best answer is interview, right? You ask
Right.
them a lot of questions. You're hiring them for a service. So just like you would make sure you have the best person coming in to, change your to fix your refrigerator or something like that. Like this is someone that you're going to have to really rely on to look at information, communicate with the school district, help you learn what you need to learn. So you're going to ask them a lot of questions and really get a good sense for how you feel about them. And knowledge of special ed is really important. Imperative that they understand the learning disability piece. And then you have to have just a good personal feeling about them, because the worst thing that could happen is finding that you've contracted with an advocate that goes in and actually starts to destroy relationships because they're so aggressive, and you really realize that you needed someone that had a different type of approach. So you want to ask questions. Maybe you could even ask them if they have any parents that they would recommend you talk to, any former clients that you could talk to, and you could learn a little bit more about their style that way.
Right, absolutely. And that the two big takeaways are needs drive goals, and building relationships with the school is just I can't say enough about it. You and the advocate and everybody, you have to build those relationships. You have to be polite. It's part of all the things you need to do to get your child the help they need. But
Great.
we are way over time, Deborah. Way
I
over time.
know. I'm sorry, everyone. I have nothing going on tonight, so I figured I'd hang out and answer questions.
Spend the evening with
I've
your
been
friends,
watching people
right?
drop off. They must have been busy. But I see that there are a lot of questions that are still in the chat box, so I'll ask Jennifer to give me a printout of those, and I will try to get some of those answered. How do you handle that, Jen? Should we post it in
Yeah,
Facebook?
I can do that, or they can also, if they'll just call that 800 number,
Oh, yeah.
we'll be more than happy to answer them. We can schedule an appointment. Go onto the website, make an appointment with a PSS. And we talk to Deborah, so it's not like we just decide all this. If you have a specific question you need for Deborah to answer, we'll be more than happy to get it to her and answer it.
Oh yeah, I drive them
So,
crazy. I drive them all crazy. So yeah, just call. That's the best way to handle it. If your question
yeah.
didn't get answered, just call the 800 number and make an appointment with one of the parent support specialists. And if you need to talk to me directly, they can get you in contact with me.
Yep, absolutely. All right, Deborah, thank you so much
Have a good
again.
night, everyone.
So much good
And
information.
everyone, I want you to know that Jennifer was actually on PTO today, which is paid time off, and she came back to do this webinar because she loves doing them so much. So thank you, Jen. I appreciate your help tonight.
Absolutely. All right, we'll see everybody later. Have a good
Bye-bye.
night. Bye-bye.